How does the most secretive brotherhood of medieval Christendom go from Vatican darlings to heretics set ablaze in a single breath of history? How does a holy order, sworn to protect pilgrims, become accused of spitting on the cross and worshipping the devil? It begins with a date that haunts calendars to this day. Friday the 13th, October 1307. A morning soaked in silence until it erupts into screaming steel and the crash of sacred doors splintering. By sunset, the legendary Knights Templar, warrior monks who once turned tides in the Crusades, are dragged in chains from stone citadels, accused of unspeakable sins. The claim? They serve not Christ, but Satan. This isn't superstition. This is a state-ordered purge by the most powerful monarch in Europe, King Philip IV of France, orchestrated with a weapon older than violence: fear. What follows is not just a massacre. It is the methodical erasure of a legend. And it all starts with a question no one dared ask, until it was too late. Paris wakes as if beneath siege. Streets choke with hoofbeats and shouts as royal bailiffs sweep through pre-dawn fog with sealed scrolls and drawn swords. Every Templar stronghold, every commandery is simultaneously raided. The coordination is surgical. Doors collapse. Monks in white mantles with crimson crosses are hauled from their cots, half-dressed, blinking in torchlight. Some resist, a few fight. Most simply fall to their knees, too stunned to speak. The king's men wear grim expressions. They too have sworn oaths. But today, it is obedience, not honor, that guides their hands. Orders from the king are absolute. Arrest every Templar in France, seize their records, confiscate their treasure. No delay, no exceptions. The shock is total. There is no time to destroy papers, hide relics, or send warnings. What was once the most feared brotherhood in Christendom is disarmed in less than a day. But Philip is not hunting warriors. He is hunting myth. And to kill a myth, he must first drag it into the light, broken and whimpering. Within the vaulted dungeons of the conciergerie, the silence turned suffocating. Stripped of weapons, rank, and dignity, the Templars are shackled not just by chains, but by the weight of disbelief. Among them is Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, his once iron stride reduced to a painful limp, his eyes red-rimmed but unbowed. He counts the faces around him, nods once to the men who marched with him across holy lands. Now they smell of mold, iron, and filth. Above ground, Philip's ministers unveil the charges, not in courtrooms, but on parchment, read in public squares. Heresy, sodomy, idol worship. The accusations ooze through the city like rot beneath stone. The demon Baphomet is named, described as a bearded head the Templars allegedly venerate in secret rites. The public, hungry for scandal and spectacle, devours every word. But these charges are not a search for truth. They are scaffolding built for a public hanging. Torture begins. Feet are crushed with boards. Oil is poured into wounds. And from blood-choked mouths, confessions bloom like poison flowers. They confess to anything, everything. But one question remains, thudding like a war drum beneath the Inquisition. Why? Why bring down the Templars now, when their swords are sheathed and coffers full? The answer lies not in sin, but in debt. King Philip owes the Templars a fortune, and the dead, conveniently, do not collect. The War Council never meets, because war was never declared. But make no mistake, this is strategy. In secret halls lined with velvet maps and whispered schemes, Philip crafts something colder than battle: propaganda. He hires clerics to comb through old rumors, spinners of tales to frame the Templars as blasphemers masquerading as holy men. With the Pope, Clement V,
Pressured like a pawn caught between bishops, Philip orchestrates a papal bull that legitimizes the arrests. Outside, the cities listen. Priests speak of the Templars turning from the light. Merchants whisper about strange symbols on coins. Mothers clutch their children tighter. Inside the cells, Jacques de Molay is dragged from sleep every night, interrogated until dawn. He tries silence, then defiance. But the men with tongs and fire have more patience than faith. What he doesn't know is that Philip has already begun melting down Templar gold, erasing their name from ledgers, rewriting history in real time, inked in both parchment and pain.
While the branding irons glow in the coals, Jacques de Molay is led into the courtyard. The sky is bruised purple, dawn just breaking, wind slicing through his tattered cloak. He limps past rows of guards who refuse to meet his gaze, their armor clinking with every breath they don't take. He smells burned hair, piss, and something worse, burned memory, as if the stones themselves are scorched with screams. It is said he does not cry out, even when the heated iron kisses flesh. Instead, he stares at the bishop delivering the charges and simply asks, "Do you believe this?" The question is too dangerous to answer. As more Templars are dragged out, swollen and broken, some begin to parrot their confessions in hollow tones. Others remain silent, eyes burning with betrayal. One coughs blood with every breath, whispering the Lord's Prayer backward because the pain has inverted his world. Only behind thick palace walls does Philip smile, not for vengeance, but for solvency. The Templars aren't just fallen warriors, they're dissolved assets. The gold funds wars, bribes, and statues. The silence buys time. But Jacques de Molay is not yet finished. Somewhere beneath the agony and degradation, a final defiance begins to kindle. Molay begins to speak, not loudly, not with fire, but with precision. Each word a blade, honed not for shouting, but for enduring. When he does confess, it's with exactness, naming the tortures used, the words fed to him, the screams that swelled into falsehoods. He calls it all what it is, a fabrication built on pain and fear. Word of his retraction slithers through the streets like smoke under a door. It reaches Rome. It reaches Avignon. It reaches Philip. The king rages. This was supposed to be finished, sealed, buried. So he orders a final gesture. No trials, no clemency. In 1314, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny, another senior Templar, are marched to the Ile de la Cité. A pyre waits, licking at the cold wind. Crowds gather not for justice but for heat and horror. As flames climb the wood, Molay speaks once more. A curse. Upon Philip, upon Clement, upon all who perverted truth. Witnesses say he holds his stare as the fire takes him, jaw clenched, eyes open, until they are ash. Months later, both Philip and the Pope are dead. Coincidence, perhaps. But in the stories whispered for centuries, the fire did not just consume flesh. It branded history with a curse that no crown could shake.
But what survives a fire meant to erase? The truth, warped by ash, the myth, sharpened by silence.
In the centuries that follow, the name of the Templars is carried not by records, but by whispers, etched into stone, carved into cathedrals, hidden in the margins of books that survive inquisitions and kings. The Friday the 13th Purge becomes more than a massacre. It becomes a specter. Sailors refuse voyages on that date. Merchants lock their ledgers tight. It is not fear of ghosts, but of justice delayed, of power misused. Somewhere in modern Paris, beneath layers of concrete and memory, the embers still pulse. Tourists pass over cobblestones without knowing they tread the bones of men who rode to Jerusalem, who bled for a cross twisted into accusation. And if you strain your ear near the Seine, just past midnight, when the city forgets itself, you might still hear it. The voice of Jacques de Molay, not screaming, but promising that where truth is burned, it does not die. It waits. But legends do not breathe alone. They need keepers. And in the shadows of Europe's courts and abbeys, a curious thing happens. Men begin to gather again, quietly, across centuries, across continents. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, secret societies claiming bloodline or right descend from the Templars' ashes. The truth of these claims is irrelevant. It is belief that reshapes nations. Wars are fought over symbols carved into ruined chapels. New empires rise atop the bones of the old, invoking martyrdom and mystery. The Vatican distances itself. France forgets. But the world remembers. Legends reconstructed from torture records and whispers in prison cells are carried forward by those who were never meant to know. And still, the date persists. Friday the 13th, a day cursed not by chance, but by design. For what is more terrifying than a truth too powerful to be allowed life? In the end, the fire did not silence the Templars. It immortalized them. Molay's voice, burned into time, speaks still, not of revenge, but of remembering. And what history forgets, myth ensures we never truly lose. But remembrance is never neutral. For every Mason's lodge enshrining the Templar rose and cross in stained glass, another hand twists the legend into darker forms. Across centuries, extremist cults, nationalist movements, even fascist ideologues seize fragments of Templar mystique, wrapping their own agendas in the illusion of holy martyrdom. The skulls, once crushed under inquisitor boots, now inspire banners waved in the name of conquest and control. This is the final irony. A brotherhood destroyed for heresy becomes the blueprint for infinite dogmas. But trace the roots, and you return always to that single, cold morning in 1307. To silence weaponized, faith corrupted, power feasting on the very knights who once shed blood to defend it. Molay's ashes do not rest, not under stone, not in sepulchres, not in peace. They move with every retelling, ignite with every misuse, smolder in every cry for justice unanswered. And that, in the end, is the true curse. Not what the Templars did, but what we do with the story they left behind. So when the calendar flips again to Friday the 13th and the world turns skittish, we laugh and call it superstition. We joke about mishaps and horror films, never realizing we are echoing a memory carved in fire. That small twinge of unease, the fleeting chill that brushes the spine. It is not fantasy. It is residue. A trace of a purification so brutal it transcended centuries. A reminder that truth, when too dangerous, is not buried. It is burned. And sometimes, just sometimes, on a quiet night laced with wind, it still crackles, not as a ghost, not as a prophecy, but as a question that refuses to die. What makes power fear truth so much it must dress execution as salvation? What lies are sacred enough to make whole orders vanish into flame? The Templars were not perfect, nor pure, but their extinction speaks more loudly than their lives ever did. They were used, then discarded, canonized in conspiracy. Their bones are dust, but their legend outlives kings. So when you see a date circled in red and feel the air shift ever so slightly, Remember Jacques de Molay, not for his sword, but for the silence he shattered with his last breath. Not for his death, but for what it exposed. Friday the 13th is not cursed. It is consecrated, with fire, confession, and the cruel faith that burns truths deemed too dangerous to stand beside thrones. Centuries later, cathedrals still whisper Templar echoes through their stained glass and worn stones. In archives locked beneath centuries of kingdoms and republics, fragments of trial testimony rot beside golden illuminations of martyrs who were never meant to be martyrs at all. Jacques de Molay rests in no shrine, yet he lingers in every moment when justice is bartered for convenience, every forced confession, every vanished truth, every name erased by decree and remembered only by defiance carries a shade of his fire. The Templars are long dead, but their death tells us what kind of world we risk when we let fear dictate law and let thrones decide theology. History, like the pyre, does not forget. It waits, and when the wind turns just right, carrying the scent of burning parchment and sanctified lies, you'll know. The flame never went out. It moved inside us. Because the truth, the raw, blistering heart of this tale, is not just that men died screaming in fire. It is that power, when cornered, will set alight anything that reminds it of the debt it owes. The Knights Templar were warriors, yes, but they were also ledgers. They were memory keepers, debt holders. Their destruction was not just extermination, it was deletion of records, of leverage, of narrative itself. History is written by victors, but sometimes the fire leaves too much charred proof behind. Too many names, too many witnesses. So it lingers, not as fact, not as gospel, but as flame twisted into myth. And in a world still ruled by unseen alliances, distant wars, and truths too fragile to surface, the Templar whisper remains. Not because they were flawless, but because they were feared. Not because they worshipped devils, but because they dared to hold kings accountable. Friday the 13th gave that fear a name. Our world gave it a legacy. And every time truth threatens empire, that fire flickers to life again, not in courtyards or pyres, but in choices, in silence or defiance, in remembering or forgetting.
Some say Jacques de Molay cursed his killers with his final breath, but curses only matter if something answers. What truly endured was not magic, but memory forged from suffering. The tragedy of the Templars wasn't their end, it was how familiar it feels today. When men in power manipulate truth, when institutions hide behind piety to erase dissent, when stories are rewritten by those holding the coin, we are standing again at the edge of that fire. Perhaps that is why the flame still mesmerizes us. Because buried beneath centuries of ash and distortion, the Templar saga is a mirror, held up to every age that forgets what happens when faith becomes possession and justice a transaction. So let the date remain. Let Friday the 13th echo not as a curse, but as a warning. That no matter how much power burns the truth, there are always embers. And embers remember. Let the fire remind us, not just of who the Templars were, but of what our world becomes when we trade truth for convenience, belief for silence, power for justice. In every tyrant who fears questions, every regime that labels dissent as heresy, the shadow of Philip IV stretches long. The pyres of 1314 are cold now, but the machinery that fed them, greed masked as godliness, fear disguised as salvation, still hums in corridors of power. If there is a legacy worth preserving, it is not the sword or the seal, but the warning engraved in ash, that no oath is strong enough to protect the innocent when kings rewrite the meaning of guilt. Jacques de Molay stood in fire because he would not let silence eat the truth. And if his voice echoes through time, it is not to haunt, but to awaken. The Templars are gone, but we, storytellers, witnesses, rememberers, we are what stands between fire and forgetting. So we do not turn away. We do not laugh off the chill of Friday the 13th. We listen, because the flame never died. It waits for us to see what is burning now.
And so the next time a calendar page falls to Friday the 13th, ask not what superstition lies there, but who we buried to make it so. Behind the flickering candles, the gory headlines, the midnight thrillers, lies a century-weary voice that refuses to fade. The voice of a brotherhood, betrayed not by faith, but by the very altars they vowed to protect. Jacques de Molay is no longer burning. He is watching. Through smoke-stained skylines, through courtrooms echoing lies, through every moment, power whispers over truth like a hymn disguising a dirge. That's the legacy carved into the date, an ember of warning beneath the ash of centuries. We are not cursed by what they did. We are accountable for what we ignore. And if we forget, the fire will remind us. Again, so remember this, not as a legend, not as folklore, but as a mark scorched into the timeline of human power. The Templars were not extinguished by evil, nor defeated in war. They were erased by politics too proud to bleed and religion too frightened to forgive. Their death was not the end of a story, but the blueprint for stories yet unwritten, each time a truth sears too close to power. As you close this chapter, do not ask whether they worshipped demons. Ask why empire needed them to, and what truths still smolder beneath our own monuments, waiting not for belief, but for a witness brave enough to listen through the smoke. This is where myth and memory converge, not to entertain, but to indict. The story of the Knights Templar is not one of mystery, but of clarity sharpened by injustice. We carved them into symbols because they were never allowed to finish their own narrative. We made them legends because truth, as it was lived, proved too dangerous to preserve unfiltered. But let this serve as testament. When power denies truth, it creates something stronger, something that breathes through locked doors and forgotten squires, through the chill of dates circled in dread, and through us, those who refuse to let silence write the final word. The Templars were not destroyed by faithlessness, but by betrayal. And so long as we remember why they burned, not in myth, but in motive, then Jacques de Molay does not smolder alone beneath history's ash. He waits, with every fire started by fear, watching to see who dares hold flame to truth next. So now the flame is yours, carried not in banners or brands, but in the questions you ask when power deflects and history grows silent. With every lie dressed in righteousness, every voice pressured into confession, the Templar legacy flickers again. It is not vengeance they left us, but vigilance. For each age will face its own Friday the 13th, disguised in new costumes bearing old intentions. In those moments, Jacques de Molay no longer waits. He rises. In every act of courage against coerced silence, in every truth spoken when it is most dangerous. Remember not just the fire, but what it tried to unmake. Remember that history is not fixed, it is fought for. And in that fire we still choose, every day, whether we are the kindling or the spark. So carry the spark. Let it unsettle you. Let it weigh heavy when the world tempts you to forget. Do not mistake legends for lies merely because they are inconveniently true.
The Templars' martyrdom was not in swords shattered, but in silence orchestrated. Their voices were drowned not by proof of guilt, but by the machinery of fear, oiled by coin and cloaked in sanctity. And now, centuries later, when tyrants rise behind flags and prayers, and when dissent is painted as danger to the realm, remember what happened when truth stood unbending before a throne and was answered with flame. Not to mourn, but to learn. Not to sanctify, but to resist. Because this story does not end in 1314. It ends only when we stop listening to the fire and allow silence to speak again. Let Friday the 13th remain not a superstition, but a scar of remembrance.
So the next time you stare into the soft flicker of a candle, or pass a cathedral that wears time like a wound, ask yourself not who the Templars were, but why their truth was feared enough to be burned. Ask who benefits when confession is extracted not through clarity, but through agony. And when the world tells you history is settled, remember the fire. Remember Molay, not for his death, but for his choice to speak anyway. Let the echo of that choice follow you through courtrooms, classrooms, battlefields, and screens. Let it remind you that the past is not ash, it is ember, and it waits for breath, the breath of someone unwilling to forget. Let the silence that once crushed a brotherhood now sharpen your own voice. Because the final lesson the Templars left us was not carved in stone, but lived in fire. That when power hides behind holiness and demands silence as truth, it is not justice being preserved. It is fear. And it is up to us, not just to listen, but to answer. So answer, not with swords, not with vengeance, but with memory sharpened into vigilance. Carry forward the stories choked by fire, the names erased by decree, the confessions forged in pain. Let them live in how we question, in what we demand from power, in how fiercely we refuse to let silence masquerade as peace. The legacy of the Knights Templar is not their fall. It is in the standing after, in the haunting truth that no fire, however sanctioned, can unmake a voice brave enough to burn for it. As long as one soul asks why the innocent were silenced, Molay stands beside them, not as ash, but as ember, alive, watchful, and waiting still. And perhaps that is all history ever asks of us, not to undo what has been done, but to hold the weight of it in our hands and choose differently. The Templars were dragged into fire, but they left behind more than scorched earth. They left the blueprint for the cost of silence, the anatomy of manufactured guilt, the echo of truth screamed too late. In every age where justice is inconvenient, where truth is twisted into tools of control, there stands a flicker. Molay's breathless defiance, waiting to be heard again. So light the candle. Speak the name. Listen through the smoke. And remember, no flame meant to silence ever truly succeeds. It only waits for someone brave enough to speak through it. So now you know. Not just the myth, not just the curse, but the anatomy of power unbound. The Knights Templar were not destroyed because they were evil. They were destroyed because they were inconvenient, because they held ledgers too heavy with truth and loyalty too deep to be bought. If history has a voice, it is not in monuments or crowns. It is in the firelight, flickering between justice and betrayal. And when that light dims, when silence thickens again like smoke across memory, it will wait, not for kings, not for popes, but for someone like you, who dares to ask what really burned on that cursed Friday the 13th, and who still carries the spark forward.
Because that's the secret history never says aloud, that the match was never only lit in 1307. It is struck again each time we erase with fear what truth has earned through pain. Each time silence buys peace at the cost of memory. The fire that engulfed Jacques de Molay did not just burn a man or a brotherhood. It burned a question into time itself, a question that flares to life every time power dares pretend its throne was never built upon the bones of those who once dared to speak. And now that question belongs to us. Will we remember? Or will we, too, let the flame grow quiet and history repeat itself in ash and silence once more?